In 2012, a French man went to the hospital complaining of leg weakness. Doctors scanned his brain and found something impossible. Where his brain should be, there was mostly fluid. 90% of his cranial cavity was empty. He had lived 44 years with barely any brain tissue. He had a job, a family, normal IQ. He was conscious, fully aware, completely functional. If consciousness is produced by the brain, this man should not exist. But he does, and he's not alone. Over the next 40 minutes, I'm going to show you something that will fundamentally change how you think about your own awareness. The evidence suggests consciousness might not be where you think it is, and that changes everything. If you want more content that challenges what you think you know about reality using actual science, subscribe now. This channel goes deep. Let's continue. You've been told your entire life that consciousness comes from your brain, that your thoughts, your feelings, your sense of self, your entire subjective experience is generated by neurons firing in your skull. This isn't just common knowledge. It's the foundational assumption of modern neuroscience, psychology, and medicine. It's what we teach in schools. It's what appears in textbooks. It's the bedrock of the materialist worldview that dominates Western science. And it seems obvious, doesn't it? Damage the brain, damage consciousness. Anesthetize the brain, consciousness disappears. Brain activity correlates with conscious experience. Case closed. Except it's not closed. Not even remotely. Because when you actually examine the evidence, when you look at what's happening in labs and hospitals around the world, when you study the anomalous cases that mainstream science tends to ignore, a very different picture emerges. A picture so strange, so unsettling, that it forces us to reconsider everything we think we know about the relationship between brain and mind. The question isn't whether the brain is involved in consciousness. Obviously it is. The question is whether the brain produces consciousness, or whether it does something else entirely. And that distinction matters more than almost anything else you could investigate about reality. Because if consciousness is produced by the brain, then you are fundamentally a biological machine. Your thoughts are chemical reactions. Your sense of self is an illusion. Death is the end. There's no deeper meaning, no larger context, no possibility of consciousness existing beyond physical form. But if consciousness isn't produced by the brain, if the brain is doing something else, then everything opens up. The nature of reality becomes negotiable again. And that's not wishful thinking. That's following the evidence wherever it leads. Over the next 40 minutes, we're going to explore 3 categories of evidence that directly challenge the production model of consciousness. First, cases where people have conscious experiences when their brains are provably non-functional, not just damaged, not just impaired, completely offline, and yet consciousness persists, sometimes even expands. Second, we'll look at neuroplasticity taken to its extreme. People living normal lives with massive brain damage or abnormalities that should theoretically make consciousness impossible. Third, we'll examine what happens to consciousness when brain activity decreases. Because according to the production model, less brain activity should mean less consciousness. But that's not what the data shows. After establishing these scientific foundations, we'll explore what this means philosophically. We'll examine the battle between materialism and idealism, between consciousness as product and consciousness as primary. And I'll guide you through a direct investigation of your own experience to see what you can discover firsthand. Because this isn't just abstract philosophy. This is about the nature of what you are. So let's begin with the cases that should be impossible. In 2001, a Dutch cardiologist named Pim van Lommel published something that disturbed the medical establishment. He had spent years documenting near-death experiences in cardiac arrest patients, not just collecting stories, documenting them systematically with medical rigor in a peer-reviewed study involving 344 cardiac arrest survivors across 10 Dutch hospitals. What he found challenges everything we think we know about consciousness and the brain. During cardiac arrest, the brain stops functioning within seconds. Blood stops flowing. Oxygen stops reaching neurons. EEG flatlines. By every measurable standard, there is no brain activity capable of producing conscious experience. And yet, 18% of Van Lommel's patients reported detailed, vivid, often life-changing conscious experiences during this period of documented brain death. They described leaving their bodies, observing the resuscitation from above, traveling through tunnels, encountering deceased relatives, experiencing profound peace or knowledge, reviewing their entire lives in comprehensive detail, then returning to find themselves back in their bodies as doctors shocked their hearts back into rhythm. Now, the standard explanation is that these experiences must have occurred either just before cardiac arrest or just after resuscitation, during brief moments when the brain was still functional. It's a reasonable hypothesis, except Van Lommel's data doesn't support it. He interviewed patients within days of their events, when memories were fresh, and correlated their experiences with precise medical timelines. What he found was that the most vivid, complex, transformative experiences occurred in patients who were clinically dead the longest, not briefly unconscious. Dead. No heartbeat, no brain activity, no oxygen, no blood flow for minutes. The relationship was inverse. The closer to death, the more elaborate the conscious experience. That's the opposite of what the production model predicts. If the brain produces consciousness, then less brain activity should mean less consciousness. But these patients reported more consciousness, richer, clearer, more vivid than normal waking awareness. They described it as becoming more conscious, not less, as if the brain, when it stops functioning, stops limiting something rather than stops producing something. But maybe these are just hallucinations generated by a dying brain desperately firing random patterns. Except that doesn't explain the veridical cases. Veridical means verifiable. Patients reporting specific, accurate details about events that occurred while they were clinically dead, details they should have no way of knowing. A woman accurately describing the shoes on the hospital roof she could see from her out-of-body position. A man recounting the exact conversation between family members in the waiting room while his EEG was flatlined. A patient describing the specific surgical instruments used during their resuscitation, placed where they couldn't possibly have seen them. These aren't vague feelings or symbolic journeys. These are concrete, verifiable observations made during periods of documented unconsciousness. And they keep happening. Sam Parnia, director of critical care at NYU, has been studying this phenomenon for decades through the AWARE study, the world's largest scientific investigation of consciousness during cardiac arrest. The data keeps accumulating. The anomalies keep appearing. And mainstream neuroscience keeps finding ways to not look at it directly. This leads us deeper, because near-death experiences, as profound as they are, happen in extreme, brief moments. But what about sustained consciousness in the absence of normal brain function? In 2007, a case was published in the journal Lancet that neuroscientists still don't know what to do with. The Frenchman I mentioned in the opening. He came to the hospital complaining of leg weakness. Routine CT scan. What they found was hydrocephalus taken to an impossible extreme. Cerebrospinal fluid had accumulated in his skull over decades, slowly compressing his brain tissue. By the time doctors saw him, his lateral ventricles, normally small fluid-filled spaces, had expanded to fill almost his entire cranium. His cerebral cortex, the part of the brain supposedly responsible for conscious thought, self-awareness, language, memory, and personality, was compressed to a thin layer just millimeters thick lining his skull. 90% of his brain was gone. And yet he was a married government worker with 2 children. His IQ was 75, below average but functional. He had lived his entire adult life this way without anyone, including himself, noticing anything was profoundly wrong. He was conscious. He was aware. He had a sense of self. He experienced the world. How? This isn't the only case. Multiple instances have been documented of people living normal or near-normal lives with massive hydrocephalus. One patient had an IQ of 126, clearly above average. despite having almost no brain tissue. Another case involved a student who graduated university before doctors discovered he had virtually no cerebral cortex. These aren't people in vegetative states. They're awake, aware, functional human beings experiencing consciousness without the brain structures supposedly necessary to produce it. The standard neuroscientific model says consciousness emerges from the complex integration of information across billions of neurons in the cortex. These people don't have that. They have thin sheets of compressed tissue where a brain should be, and yet consciousness persists. Some neurologists argue that the remaining tissue must be functioning with extreme efficiency, that the brain has compensated by packing all necessary functions into whatever tissue remains. That's possible. The brain is remarkably plastic, but there's a limit to compression. You can't squeeze 90% of brain function into 10% of brain tissue without something giving. And these patients aren't displaying 90% impairment. Some are barely impaired at all. The relationship between brain tissue and conscious experience is not what we've been told it is. Now let's look at what might be the most disturbing evidence of all. What happens when you directly suppress brain activity? According to the production model, consciousness should decrease proportionally. Less brain, less consciousness. But research with psychedelic compounds reveals something impossible. When people take substances like psilocybin or LSD, they consistently report experiencing expanded consciousness. More awareness, not less. Richer subjective experience, profound insights, sense of connection, dissolution of boundaries, what neuroscientists call ego death, the temporary vanishing of the sense of separate self. These experiences are so powerful, so transformative, that they can permanently change people's perspectives on life, death, and reality. Studies show lasting reductions in anxiety, depression, and fear of death after a single high-dose psychedelic experience. So the brain must be hyperactive during these states, right? More consciousness, more brain activity. That would fit the production model perfectly. Except when Robin Carhart-Harris at Imperial College London actually measured brain activity during psilocybin experiences using fMRI, he found the opposite. Brain activity decreased significantly. The default mode network, the brain's primary hub of integrated activity, showed dramatically reduced blood flow and connectivity. Areas associated with self-referential thought, the experience of being a separate me, went quieter, not louder. The brain was doing less, not more. And yet participants reported experiencing more. Consciousness expanded as brain activity contracted. This pattern repeats with other psychedelics, DMT, ayahuasca, LSD. All produce experiences described as more real than real, clearer than everyday consciousness, accompanied by reduced rather than increased brain activity. Advanced meditators show similar patterns. After decades of practice, they report accessing states of consciousness far beyond normal waking awareness. Profound clarity, boundless awareness, complete presence. EEG measurements show their brains settling into highly synchronized, simplified patterns. Less complexity, not more. Less activity, not more. And yet more consciousness. The correlation is inverse. This is the pattern that emerges again and again when you actually look at the data without assuming the conclusion. Brain damage can impair consciousness, yes, but it can also leave consciousness intact despite massive structural loss. Brain death can correlate with some of the most vivid conscious experiences humans report. Reduced brain activity can expand rather than contract subjective awareness. The relationship isn't one-to-one. It's not production. It might be something closer to filtering or transduction or permission, as if the brain doesn't create consciousness but rather constrains it, shapes it, focuses it. And when you remove the constraints, consciousness doesn't disappear, it expands. Quick note before we go deeper. If you're finding value in this investigation and you want more content that actually follows the evidence wherever it leads, make sure you're subscribed. And if you're noticing you understand this intellectually but want help applying it in practice, I created something specific for that gap. It's called the manifestation path. link in the description. I'll leave it there for you. Now let's explore what this means philosophically and experientially. What we've been looking at isn't just neuroscience. It's the collision between two fundamentally opposed views of reality that have been battling for centuries. On one side, materialism, the view that consciousness is produced by matter, that brain creates mind, that the physical world is primary and subjective experience is secondary, derivative, emergent from physical processes. On the other side, idealism, the view that consciousness is primary, that subjective experience is the ground of being, and that what we call the physical world is actually constructed within or by consciousness, rather than the other way around. This isn't just abstract philosophy, it's the most important question you can ask about reality. Because which one is true determines everything else. What you are, what happens when you die, whether meaning exists, whether reality is open or closed, whether you're fundamentally a witness or fundamentally a biological robot. Materialism has dominated Western science for centuries, and for good reason. It works. Treat the brain as a machine, consciousness as its output, and you can predict, manipulate, and intervene with remarkable success. Neuroscience has mapped neural correlates of specific experiences. Damage this area, lose that function, stimulate this region, produce that sensation. The correlations are real, the interventions work, materialism delivers results, but correlation isn't causation. And what we've seen in the previous section are cases where the correlations break down, where consciousness persists without the physical substrate supposedly producing it, where reduced brain activity amplifies rather than diminishes subjective experience. These aren't minor anomalies. They're direct challenges to the foundational assumption that matter produces mind. And yet, mainstream neuroscience largely ignores them, dismisses them, or explains them away, because acknowledging them would require reconsidering the entire framework. Idealism, historically, was the dominant view in many philosophical traditions. Berkeley argued that to exist is to be perceived, that objects only exist as experiences in consciousness. Kant suggested that space, time, and causality are structures of perception, not properties of reality itself. Schopenhauer claimed that the world is fundamentally will, and physical form is its appearance. Vedanta philosophy in India has maintained for millennia that consciousness, not matter, is the primary reality, and that the material world is a kind of projection or dream within universal awareness. These weren't mystical speculations. They were rigorous philosophical investigations into the nature of experience, and they arrived at conclusions that modern neuroscience is now being forced to confront through its own anomalies. The hard problem of consciousness, as philosopher David Chalmers calls it, is the question of why physical processes in the brain should produce subjective experience at all. Why is there something it's like to be you? Why doesn't information processing happen in the dark, mechanically, without any inner light of awareness? Materialism has no answer. It assumes consciousness emerges from complexity, but it can't explain how or why. Idealism doesn't have that problem because it starts with consciousness as given and explains matter as its content, rather than trying to derive consciousness from matter. Now, what does this mean for your direct experience? Not theoretically, but right now, in your actual lived reality. You've been assuming your entire life that consciousness is located in your head, produced by your brain, contained within your skull. But have you ever actually found it there? Close your eyes for a moment and try to locate your consciousness. Not your thoughts, but the awareness that knows the thoughts. Not your sensations, but the witnessing presence that experiences sensations. Where is it? Is it behind your eyes? In your forehead? Somewhere in the center of your head? Most people initially feel like it's in there somewhere, but when you look closely, when you actually try to pinpoint the location of awareness itself, something strange happens. You can't find it. You can find the sensations of your head, the pressure, the tingling, the sense of space. But the awareness that knows those sensations, where is that? It's not in your head. It's not anywhere in space. It's the condition for space. the field in which spatial sensations appear. Try this investigation directly. Right now, notice the sensation of your hands. There's a feeling there, pressure against surface, temperature, perhaps tingling or warmth. Now ask yourself, where is the knowing of that sensation? Not the sensation itself, but the awareness that's aware of it. Is the awareness in your hands? No. The awareness isn't located in what it's aware of. Is it in your brain? How would you know? You've never perceived your brain directly. You've seen images of brains, but you've never experienced your own brain from the inside. All you have is awareness and whatever appears in awareness. Sensations, thoughts, perceptions, feelings. But the awareness itself, the consciousness that knows all of this, has no location. It's not in the body. It's not in the brain. It's not in space at all. Spatial objects appear in it, but it doesn't appear in space. This isn't a belief. This isn't a philosophy. This is just looking at your direct experience without assuming you already know what it is. Now notice your sense of self, the feeling of being me, the one who's experiencing all of this. Where is that? Again, most people feel like the self is in the head, behind the eyes, looking out. The homunculus, the little person inside piloting the body. But when you actually look for it, can you find it? There's a visual field extending outward. There are thoughts arising in awareness. There are sensations throughout the body. But where exactly is the me that's supposedly having all this? You can find thoughts about yourself. I am this. I did that. I want this. But those are just thoughts. Where's the actual self that's thinking them? You can find emotions associated with self, pride, shame, fear. But those are just feelings. Where's the self that feels them? When you look directly, without assumption, you find experiences but no experiencer, sensations but no sensor, thoughts but no thinker. There's awareness, and there are contents of awareness. But the separate self you thought you were, the one located in the head, running the show, making decisions, having experiences, when you actually look for it, it's not there. It never was. It was always an assumption, a belief, a story, not an actual discoverable entity. This investigation has profound implications. If consciousness isn't in the brain, if it's not located in space, if it's the field in which all experiences, including spatial experiences, occur, then the near-death experiences make sense. The hydrocephalus cases make sense. The psychedelic expanded states make sense. Because consciousness was never dependent on the brain in the first place. The brain might modulate it, focus it, filter it, give it structure and content, but it doesn't produce it. It's more like a radio receiver than a generator. Damage the receiver, and the signal becomes distorted or stops coming through. But the signal itself, the consciousness, that's not produced by the receiver. It's transduced by it, shaped by it, limited by it. And when the receiver is damaged or shut down, consciousness doesn't necessarily disappear. It might expand beyond the constraints the receiver was imposing. This is what the evidence suggests, not as proof, but as a model that actually fits the data rather than contradicting it. Eastern philosophical traditions have been investigating this experientially for millennia. Advaita Vedanta teaches that the self, the I, is not the body or mind, but the awareness in which body and mind appear. That consciousness is not personal, not produced, not located, but is the fundamental reality that everything else appears within. Buddhism, particularly in its more experiential forms, guides practitioners to directly investigate the self and discover its absence, its emptiness, not as nihilism, but as liberation. These aren't beliefs to adopt, they're investigations to conduct. And when you conduct them honestly, without assuming the conclusion, you might find that what you thought you were, a localized consciousness, produced by a brain in a body, isn't what direct experience reveals. What you find instead is awareness itself, spacious, locationless, without center or boundary, containing all experience but not produced by any particular object within experience. The brain appears in it, the body appears in it, thoughts and sensations appear in it, but it doesn't appear in any of them, and this recognition changes everything. Not because it gives you new information, but because it reveals what was always already the case. You were never in your head. Your head was always in you. Let's bring all of this together. We've seen people having detailed, verifiable conscious experiences when their brains are clinically dead, with no blood flow, no oxygen, no measurable activity. We've seen people living normal lives with 90% of their brains missing, maintaining consciousness, personality, and functionality, despite the absence of tissue supposedly required to generate these things. We've seen consciousness expand dramatically as brain activity decreases, with psychedelics and meditation producing states described as more conscious than normal waking awareness, while brain metabolism and connectivity drop. And we've investigated directly and found that consciousness has no location in space, that the self we think we are can't be found when we actually look for it, and that awareness itself is the condition for experience rather than the product of experience. These aren't separate facts. They're all pointing to the same conclusion. The brain doesn't produce consciousness. It might modulate it. It might focus it. It might give it particular structure and content, but it doesn't generate it from nothing. Consciousness appears to be primary, fundamental, the ground, rather than the product. This isn't mysticism. This is following the evidence. The materialist assumption that matter produces consciousness was never based on direct observation. It was an assumption, a starting point, a framework imposed on the data. And it's been useful. It's allowed neuroscience to map brain states to mental states, to develop treatments for neurological disorders, to understand how damage to specific regions affects specific functions. But useful doesn't mean true. And when you actually examine the edge cases, the anomalies, the situations where the framework should make clear predictions, but instead makes the wrong ones, you have to be willing to reconsider the foundation. The pattern that emerges from the data is this. Consciousness and brain activity correlate under normal circumstances. Damage the brain, impair consciousness. Anesthetize the brain, consciousness seems to vanish. But correlation doesn't prove production. And in extreme cases, the correlation breaks down entirely. Brain dead, consciousness persists. Brain mostly absent, consciousness remains functional. Brain activity suppressed, consciousness expands. The relationship is more complex than production. It looks more like constraint. Imagine consciousness as something like radio waves, fundamental to reality, not localized to any particular object. The brain would be a receiver, a transducer, something that takes this non-local consciousness and gives it specific form, specific content, specific limitations. It makes consciousness personal, individuated, focused on this body, this life, this set of sensory inputs. Damage the receiver, the signal becomes distorted. Destroy the receiver, the signal stops being translated into bodily experience. But the signal itself, the consciousness, that's not created by the receiver, and doesn't disappear when the receiver is destroyed. It just stops being constrained in that particular way. This model fits all the data we've examined. Near-death experiences, the receiver temporarily offline, consciousness briefly unconstrained before being pulled back through the repaired receiver. Hydrocephalus cases, the receiver damaged but still functional enough to provide basic constraints and focus. Psychedelic states, the receiver's filtering function partially disabled, allowing more of the signal through than normal. It's not perfect, but it fits. And it fits better than the production model, which has to explain away every single one of these cases as anomaly, error, or hallucination. The deeper implication is about what you are. You've been taught you're a body that has consciousness, a biological organism that somehow developed subjective experience through evolutionary processes. But the evidence suggests the opposite might be true. Your consciousness that has a body, awareness that's temporarily focused through a particular nervous system, creating the experience of being a separate individual. But the awareness itself, that's not produced by the body, it's fundamental. And when the body dies, when the brain stops functioning, the awareness doesn't disappear. It just stops being constrained in this particular way. This isn't belief. This isn't religion. This is the model that best fits the scientific data we have, as strange and unsettling as it might seem. And once you see it, once you really see it through both evidence and direct investigation, you can't unsee it. The materialist story starts to look like a story, a narrative we told ourselves because it was useful, but not necessarily true, and the idealist understanding that consciousness is fundamental and matter is its content rather than its source, that starts to look less like philosophy and more like accurate description of what the evidence actually reveals. What this means practically is that reality is open, not fixed, not determined by physical laws operating mechanically on dead matter, but participatory, conscious, responsive. The observer affects the observed not just in quantum mechanics, but in the basic structure of reality itself. Because consciousness isn't a byproduct, it's the ground. And if consciousness is primary, then your awareness, your attention, your intention, those aren't impotent epiphenomena riding along on deterministic physical processes. They're causal, they're creative, they're fundamental to how reality unfolds. This doesn't mean you can think things into existence magically. The brain still provides structure and constraint. But it means the relationship between mind and world is bidirectional, not one way. You're not just observing reality. You're participating in its ongoing creation through what you attend to, what you focus on, what you collapse through your conscious observation. And that changes everything. Because if you're not a biological robot whose consciousness will end at death, if your awareness itself temporarily focused through a body, then death isn't the end. It's a transition, a release of constraint. And life becomes not about surviving as long as possible, but about what you do with this temporary focus of consciousness while you have it. What you create, what you become aware of, how you relate to the awareness that you are and that everything else is. This isn't the conclusion. This is the beginning of the real investigation. And it starts with what you can directly verify in your own experience right now. I'm going to tell you something you already know, but avoid looking at directly. You consume a lot of content about consciousness, reality, human potential. Probably more than most people. But your life hasn't changed proportionally. You have powerful insights that last 3 days. You have moments of clarity that dissolve into routine. You understand deep concepts that don't translate into action. And it's not your fault. It's the design of the system. Consuming content activates the same reward circuits as actual transformation, but without the work of actual transformation. Your brain confuses understanding with changing. The truth is, between you and the life you want, you don't lack knowledge, you lack system. The manifestation path is that system. It's not another course. It's not more theory. It's 28 days of structured practice that takes you from I know intellectually to I live bodily. Workbook 1 makes you see the unconscious program keeping everything the same. Workbook 2 makes you build total clarity about who you're becoming, not vaguely, but with precision. Workbook 3 makes you practice every day until the new identity is your new normal. It's not about motivation. It's about reprogramming. It's not about willpower. It's about neural alignment. It's what happens when you finally stop watching and start embodying. Link in the description. It's for those ready for all this knowledge to finally become real life. If you want to work with this understanding directly, here are 3 practices you can start immediately. First practice, the location investigation. Several times throughout your day, stop and ask, where is awareness right now? Not where do you feel sensations, but where is the knowing of those sensations located? You'll consistently find that awareness itself has no location in space, that it's the field in which spatial sensations appear. Do this investigation repeatedly until it becomes second nature, until you stop assuming consciousness is in your head and start recognizing it as the space in which everything, including your head, appears. Second practice, the self-inquiry. When you notice the sense of being a separate me, A self that's having experiences, experiencing stress, wanting something, fearing something. Pause and look directly for that self, not the thoughts about self, but the actual entity supposedly having the thoughts. Look honestly. Can you find it? You'll discover thoughts, sensations, perceptions, but no actual findable self at the center. Just awareness and contents of awareness. This recognition alone can dissolve enormous amounts of suffering, because most suffering requires belief in a separate self that can be threatened. Third practice. Observe the relationship between brain states and consciousness in your own experience. Notice what happens to awareness when you're tired, when brain function is impaired. Does awareness itself disappear, or does it remain while the content becomes less clear? Notice what happens in the moment before sleep, that threshold where the brain is shutting down, but awareness is still present, witnessing the shutdown. These direct observations will show you that consciousness and brain state are correlated but not identical, that awareness persists as a constant while brain-mediated content varies. The question this video investigated isn't academic. It's the most important question you can ask about your own existence. What are you? Are you a temporary biological phenomenon that will end when your brain dies? Or are you awareness itself, fundamental and primary, temporarily focused through a body, but not dependent on it? The evidence suggests the latter, not as proof, but as the model that fits the data. And the investigation is something you can conduct directly right now in your own experience. You don't have to believe anything, just look, question the assumptions. Find out what direct observation reveals when you strip away the stories you've been told about what you are. Because the materialist story, that consciousness is in the brain, produced by neurons, destined to end at death, that's just a story. It was never based on direct observation, it was an assumption. And when you actually examine both the scientific evidence and your own experience without that assumption, a very different picture emerges. One where consciousness is primary, fundamental, and you are that consciousness, temporarily wearing the costume of a body, playing the role of a separate individual, but never actually separate from the awareness that everything appears within. And when you recognize that, when you see it directly, not as belief, but as lived understanding, everything changes. Not because you gain new abilities or superpowers, but because you stop living in the fiction that you're a limited, mortal, separate entity struggling to survive in an indifferent universe. You recognize what you actually are, and what you are has never been born and will never die. It's been here all along, the light in which everything appears, mistaking itself for objects in its own light. If this investigation expanded how you see consciousness and reality, leave a like. It helps others find this. And drop a comment answering this. Have you ever had an experience where consciousness seemed to persist or expand despite reduced brain function during sleep deprivation, illness, meditation, or any other altered state? I want to hear what you've directly observed.